My name is Andrew, and as a result of a conference which I had recently in Warwickshire, subject was so interesting that some people have asked us to set it down in a more permanent record. So here comes a video, really, to talk about that. And the background, I suppose I should introduce really what's been my story to date. Life began for me in about end of September 1941, and I came into the world in 1942. My father was out of a coal mining family in Hutton, Barnsley, 12th of 13 children, and Dad didn't like school, so he made it his life's objective to miss it whenever he could. My mother was completely different. My mother was also from Barnsley, but turned out to be nobility French, and she taught Dad to read and write. And between them, I appeared in Golka in Yorkshire in the middle of, well, the end of August, the end of July. And so introduction to life there was on stone flags with a clipping rug, and life was very simple. And my aunt was able to afford eventually to send me to grammar school, which was a big step forward. And there I found I had some gifts in languages, not very bright on all the academic things, but languages, yes. And so from then, I left, and in 1960 began working in the Customs and Excise, which got me down into the London East End, and then later across from there into Heathrow Airport. Life was very interesting there. The airport was huge. It had 36,000 people working there in 1962. And so I moved across to Heathrow Airport. And from there, I met and married my first wife. And along came our first daughter at that time. But money wasn't brilliant in the Customs and Excise, so we decided that I'd move into the London Metropolitan Police, which I joined in 1965. And during that time, many varied things. 2 years initial working in uniform was necessary, and then you could choose whatever you wanted to work on, whether it was going to be river police or motorbikes or CID or horses. And so I've applied to get into the CID, and in 1967, after being a temporary for a couple of years, I was accepted as a permanent in the CID. Now, in that time, I'm going to say something which is probably quite horrific to many people who don't understand the background of control. But the aim of that temporary period in the CID was to see what people were made of, those who were flexible, those who were not. And after 12 months or so, they would see who was prepared to slightly bend the rules, I guess. And so I was young and keen to get on and got involved in one or two things, which today, I don't know whether it's the same or not. But they were slowly bringing us as a unit into a place where we were compromised on the truth. And that was the way things were run in those days. The CID were the real background control. And if villains were too active, someone would be picked out and a little bit of evidence would be made up, and the chap might get 3 months in prison. And the rest of the villains in the area would get the message. And this was not at all uncommon. And when I'd gone into the CID training school, there was always this undercurrent of understanding that things could be done which weren't official, but they were they turned a blind eye to them, you know. And one of these was Section 4 of the Vagrancy Act, which in those days was still used for the ability to stop and search under one legislation. But also the Vagrancy Act was a great one for detaining and questioning suspected persons who might be going to commit a crime. So after 2 years, I was in the office one morning in Hounslow, and the chief superintendent came in, and we're not giving any names at this stage of who these people were. But I'd been fairly active, let's say that. And so, oh, you look like you've had a new lease of life, lad. We'll have to see about getting you a promotion board. And within no time, I was made a permanent detective constable. And I remember walking back into that station on the day this confirmation was given and being met by the Detective Chief Inspector, who said the following. He said, welcome aboard. He said, always take the folding kind of joy, never, never touch property, and never go back to the well. And the significance of that kind of surprised me a bit. It didn't shock me, but I began to see that there were two levels of working. And slowly this developed until it was fairly common. You would know names were coming and going of people who were active, who were being reproached or criticized because of working in this way, but somehow it all seemed to be kind of accepted in the background that people bent the rules. Performance and promotion was always depending on results. There's one particular person that I worked with briefly there who has subsequently written a book, and it's on my reading list. But names were known of those who were well prepared to bend the rules, and as the villains would say, fit you up, fabricate evidence for something that you hadn't done. And of course, the likely victim for this treatment would be somebody with previous convictions, so that when we get in front of the local magistrate's court, whose word are they going to believe? A prisoner with previous convictions or the wonderful, honourable officers who are giving evidence? And so this is how it worked. And it's a short step from there to becoming involved in more substantial things where brown envelopes are changing hands to make sure that villains get bail when they do appear in court. And so we go down this slippery slope. And although in my case, nobody had actually gone to prison for the things that I had said, I could see that there was only one way this was going to go. You were going to get deeper in. And in that time, I'd worked on several quite high, prominent cases. And I got, by 1970, I'd reached the rank of detective sergeant, at which point it was kind of whispered to me that, well, that's good, but, if you want to get any higher, you'll have to join the Freemasonry. And I wasn't by any means a strong-minded person on that, but I knew that it wasn't particularly healthy. And that got me to thinking about how far I got so far and how much further I could go in that particular profession, if it is a profession. And then in 1972, I got a phone call when I was working down at Nine Elms to say my father was ill in hospital in Bournemouth. And my father had, in 1951, after 17 years of watching his brother's life, decided to become what we would call a Christian. And he'd watched Bill's life for 17 years and had taken us back in 1951 to a similar church in our local town. And from that day on, my father's life had changed. And so here I was visiting him in a hospital where he was dying with tuberculosis. But, he was radiant. And I've always remembered this. It was such a striking day. Hardly able to draw breath, and yet absolutely radiant in the faith that was taking him on the next step of his journey. And that struck me very powerfully. And within 3 weeks, unexpectedly in the end, he was gone. But I saw in him in that time, that simple man who had been taught to read and write, and all the things which I had been trained to trust and believe and rely on, all the material things that I had surrounded myself with were nothing compared to the sincerity of that moment for him and the purity of it. And this really, really struck me hard. And I spent the next 2 years or so really wrestling with my conscience. At that time, I was working in the old New Scotland Yard in the centre of London. And I had my office in there, but every Friday lunchtime, I found time to get away, and I went down to what's called the Westminster Chapel. This, I think, is in Petty France, if I remember now. And I got from the caretaker the use of a particular room, and I was so troubled in my spirit that I was in the wrong place. And yet I knew what it would cost to get rid of the problem which I'd brought upon myself. And I didn't know quite how to handle that. So I waited, I meditated, I prayed. And I remembered a verse which I read years ago in the scriptures about Abraham. It said that when Abraham fell on his face, that was when God talked to him. So I began to literally just lie on the floor face down. And there came a day, and it was Friday, the 9th of August, 1974. That's a half century ago now. And I knew that if there was anything in that room, it was like being an egg under a chicken, I would say. It was warm. I could hardly stand. I'm not going to say it was an angel, but there was a presence there. And I knew from that moment that that was the day I had to make my decision. And so I walked back into the main building of Scotland Yard, and I didn't go to my own office. I went up into the discipline department. And I went up to the information counter and I said, I know I'm going to prison, but I have to leave this service. Of course, I guess people thought I was crazy. And so, of course, I was suspended from duty while things were investigated. And within no time, my name was on the front of the Daily Mail because money was changing hands somewhere quietly to give the information to the press, because here was a big scoop sort of thing. But after about 3 weeks, I'd gone back in for an interview and a caution. And I was sitting in the foyer of the main building and trying to, just waiting in terminal to go up in the lift to be interviewed. And through the door walked a chap, and again, no names, but someone I'd worked with, ex-flying squad, carried a firearm. And as he came in, he saw me, and he couldn't face me. And I looked at that afterwards, and I thought, well, because he knew that I knew enough about him to send him where I was volunteering to go. And so at that moment, I began to see that there was a way forward, and this was going to be a big difficulty, but there was a reward at the end of it. So eventually, at the end of 1974, rather, the beginning of 1975, I went into the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, and pleaded guilty to offences of perjury, and was given 3 years imprisonment. So that was a background that I hadn't expected to have. I went from the prison into Wormwood Scrubs, and as an ex-copper in prison, expecting at least to get a good kicking or something like that. But it was amazing, really, that people seemed to understand that, daft as it was, had done the right thing in an odd way. And so I was there for a while and then went down into an open prison where there were 1,400 men, half of whom wanted to have a go at me, and various unpleasantries for a while. But I remember going to, after about 5 weeks, I needed a haircut. So I went to see the camp barber, and he said, how are you getting on? And I said, well, it's just tough, sort of being hated all the time. And his next word surprised me, because he said, well, you've got a lot of friends in here, you know. And it turned out that half the camp sort of hated me for what I'd been, and the other half of the camp seemed to understand that why I'd done it. So the upshot of that was that 12 months later, I came out on parole and got a chance to start a new life in a different trade. So that more or less sums up the thing about that, except that there is one thing that happened, I remember, and this was important. When I was in the closed prison at Wormwood Scrubs, someone had to be brought in who was going to be a super grass, and of course, the other cons mustn't be allowed to see who that is. So people were quickly hushed away and into a cell and locked up, so the person could come through. And I found myself in a room with two of these guys, And in the course of conversation, I said, well, it's in my room upstairs. And one of them turned and said, that's not a room, it's a cell. And I realized the difference that freedom makes, because although my body was incarcerated, my spirit was free. And that was quite a thing which I'd never forgotten because of the powerful background to that. And so, as I said, after that, I moved out and got a new trade entirely. Yes, we've called this section What's It All About? There's been such a lot of interest over the last 4 or 5 years, as I'm aware, with the way that the taxation system in this country is operating, the way it's run. And we've had to dig down for about probably in total maybe 4 years to get to know how much we know today. And we're not saying that we know everything, but it's quite clear that if we go back as far as May of 1933, in the United States, the government was pretty much bankrupt. And I think Roosevelt, from memory, was the president at the time. And the situation over there was bailed out by the world bankers. And the only thing that could be offered as collateral for the financial assistance which the state got was the sweat equity of the people. And so this involved repayment from a new false double identity for each person. And that pretty much is a parallel experience in the UK. We have a saying over here, when America sneezes, Europe catches a cold. Well, I think we've got to remember that the two countries are very parallel, and we shall discuss that in more detail later on. But the method of running things was covert, and people weren't told the full truth. And that's, you might think, a simple thing, but a very small but powerful error, or maybe not an error, deceit that occurred. So it became clear that a false persona was being created for every infant as it comes out of the womb. And we have slowly found out that certainly in the UK, and I guess it's no different anywhere else, having spoken to people from in America recently, we seem to be pretty much on the money with this experience, with this mindset. We've got the national insurance number and the National Health Service number for every infant is allocated at birth, so it's sort of earmarked for that purpose. And it isn't until the child gets to be a teenager, perhaps 15, almost 16 years old, that they're told, oh, you have a national insurance number now, young man, young lady, and you can make contributions. So what we didn't know at the time was that at the birth of the infant, once we know that the infant's sound, the thing that always happened was that it's weighed. And I'd never really thought about this at all until I began to realize that stories were going around that, in fact, the weight of the child was then credited to that persona in value as against the current price of gold on the stock markets of the day of birth. So a child of £6 15 ounces, or 111 ounces if the gold was on the day £1,700, do your own sums, and you see that an infant has a nominal credit value probably in excess of £150,000, £170,000 at birth. What we've later come to understand is that this value is taken and set as a bond and is tradable on the stock markets of the world for those first 15 years without even the father and the mother being informed about this, of knowing anything about it at all. And this even continues after we reach the age of 16. We are now, each of us, making our own contribution. And in my case, I was able to check up, I think about 4 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, that it was possible to go on a particular website and you could put in your personal details there, and indeed they would confirm not only that that was your reference, but they could cite the number of times that your bond had been used for commercial gain. And I remember seeing that mine had been used something like 874,600 odd times commercially, without even necessarily being aware of what was going on. And so this brings us to this area of how have they done this? And we see that there is this mixed sort of legal language which comes out. And some call it legalese, some call it a glossa, but it's a sort of a bastard version of Latin. And this is going back a long way. We have to go back to the 6th century to find the origins of this. And there is a paper going around which had been done by an Australian who had put himself at some risk about this. And it's about the Justinian deception. And it seems that around that time, I think Justinian was something like 567 AD, he had hit upon this concept of 3 levels of liberty within the Roman state system. And you will remember, most of us, I guess, that on the public buildings, nearly all the inscriptions are always in capital letters in Roman language, in the Latin. And so this has a beautiful sounding name, Capitis Diminutio Maxima, where everything's in maximum caps. And anything that's in there was regarded as being in total absolute slavery. And there are papers which we can make available to anybody who wants to read this in detail. Then there's a lesser grade where you might have a capital A and a capital B for your first and second names, but the remainder of that word will be written in lowercase. And this became known as Capitis Diminutio Media, or medium. Loss of some liberties, but still allowed others. And then the third, easier category of Capitis Diminutio Minima, where all the name is written lowercase, which placed virtually no restrictions on the person concerned. They were pretty well free to do as they like. This all came about and became known as a sort of dog Latin, the way this was done. And I'm going to read you a little bit here just from this lad's book. He says, an account of grammatical crimes became a sort of dog Latin, a debased, criminal, immoral, foreign written language that renders all such dog Latin documents tended by corporate private governments as counterfeit. Dog Latin is unhyphenated, all uppercase Latin symbolic text. So it looks solid, but it's a deception right under our nose. And the media is one step down from that, as we've said. And this system, devised so long ago, is still understood in this 21st century and is still used by our government in a controlling way. So these titles which are given to the persona at birth are not exactly what the father and the mother might have wanted, not exactly what the father and mother might have wanted the child to have, but it becomes a capitalized false name. And in America, these are known as the straw man. In England, we tend to call them the legal fiction. And so this is all operated, as we now understand it, through the City of London, which some people call the square mile. And apparently in statute, the City of London is a state within a state. And I understand that even the sovereign today would require special permission to enter such a state on formal occasions. And in there is all the control that makes this whole system work. And this is true. We can look in the American Treasury. There's a treasury, I guess, in every country where the Commonwealth, there's a clue in the word, where the Commonwealth operates, that there is a treasury. But I guess in reality, there's only one treasury. And that's run from the City of London. I've been asked about this term Livingstones. People say, what is it? What are you, a new political party, or what are you, some sort of religious cult? What's it all about? And the words Livingstones really came to me at the time when I'd left prison. I was out on parole and life was becoming easier. And it kind of dropped into my mind. And I'd looked at some of the big, very old church buildings around the world. And the formality of service that went on in there, people reciting exactly the same thing, word for word, virtually, week after week, and thinking, well, there's not much life in that. There's not much animation. There's not much variation, really. It was all pretty stilted. And Livingstones came to me, and it's a term that comes, I think, in the first epistle of Peter, and it's chapter 2, and round about verse 5. He, our risen Messiah, is referred to as the stone at which the builders rejected, but has now become the head of the corner. And then it says that you too are living stones, you people. You believers, you followers are living stones. And this is where the name came. And so I thought, well, that's true in a way, because it's the people who are the real church. I mean, the building could be used for anything. And indeed, if you think about the Quakers in the 17th century, the Quakers in the 17th century wouldn't go into what they called steeple houses. They were free of that kind of system, and so they used to meet in the open, or in later years have built their own shelters. But there was a freedom from that statutory system, and they were also like living stones. So this kind of just became a tag. And people have asked me, what is it? And I said, well, it's just a tag of identification, really. It now is becoming a private members association, and it could become much more for various reasons. But what we've found out, applied in the spiritual sense, that the people are the living stones of the real fellowship, the real synagogue, the real ecclesia, whatever language you want to use, not the stone buildings. In the same way, it's true in an everyday sense. I'm not going to use the word political, but in everyday sense, we are not the dead legal fiction which the government wants to tag us with. We are very much alive and very far from being dead. And so we are living people, living stones. And so that name kind of grew out of that. And I'm just going to read you now. All these documents are available for anybody who wants to follow them up afterwards. There's 4 years worth of documents to look at. This is just a selection of what we picked out today. We've got a simple manifesto, a statement of fact here, that we are not a political party, nor are we religious cults. We're simply a group of living beings, flesh and blood, spiritually united in heart and soul. We stand as individuals, yes, built together, however, under a common natural law, which law is shared by all, it's owned by none, and it's superior to any statute. We each of us have a personal commitment, divinely inspired, to do no harm, to cause no loss to others, to commit no fraud, and to keep the peace. That's the manifesto. And with that, we have a kind of an oath is the wrong word, but a kind of a statement. Be without fear, even in the face of your enemies, and believe you me, if you take this step, you will get some enemies. But be brave and upright, that your God may love you. Speak truth always, even if it leads to your death. Safeguard the helpless and do no wrong. And while we're talking about that, it drops into my mind that this man in America who's quite well known, James O'Keefe, was addressing an all-male meeting, and this thing was recorded. And in the middle of what he was saying, he turned to all the men in the audience. He said, well, what is your price? What is your price? $2 million? $20 million? He said, these words struck me. He said, I cannot afford to surround myself with people whose price is not their life. If your price is not your life, you can be bought, you can be compromised. So your price has to be your life. That's the cost of your commitment. And I think we shall see the day when not all of us will have such a smooth ride as we've enjoyed so far. But even in the face of death, truth does not become error. So this thing's, if we were going to give it a title, is the diminished capacity of status and our legal capacity that goes with it. So what we're reading about, although it is devised many centuries ago, is not merely historical, not merely 6th century Roman Empire stuff. The same the crown agents today, the present crown agents, are still applying exactly the same principles to us, the proletariat, today as they did then. In Roman law, a diminishing or abridgment of personality was and still is used as a loss or curtailment of status or aggregate of legal attributes following certain changes in a person's civil condition. And so the three stata that we talked about, the status of the capitis, maxima, the media, and the minima, the most comprehensive of all, this first one, occurred when a man or woman's condition was changed from one of freedom to one of bondage. The state had been bound as a slave to the state. When a man or a woman became a slave through conversion. The second one, the media, is a lesser loss of status, but this would occur when a man or woman would lose their rights of citizenship, but without losing his liberty. And it also carried away some family rights. For example, if a man was called John Doe, capital J, capital D, that would be medium. So the third section of minima is the lowest or least comprehensive degree of loss of status, which would occur when a man or woman's family relations alone were changed. It happened upon the allegation of a person who had been his own master or upon the emancipation of one who had been a slave. So under this status, there is no master and no one to answer to. And so that anyone under capitis minima is free to go where he or she wants. And so those are really just the three differences. And by way of example of that, there's this document which is personal, but there's no reason why we shouldn't look at it. This is an order which came from the Court of Protection at the time that my dear wife Angela went into mental capacity care. And this document is issued in 2020 in the matter of Angela Smith. And this Angela Smith here is all in capital letters. And it's an order appointing a deputy for her property and affairs. Upon the court, it says, being satisfied that Angela Smith lacks capacity to make various decisions. But in this sentence, the words Angela Smith are now capital A, capital S, and the rest is written in lowercase. So now the court are inferring to us here and wanting us to believe that capital letters Angela Smith is the same persona as capital A, capital S Angela Smith. Two descriptions of the one persona, one person. And then further down, the deputy who was appointed, his name is shown as Grant Smith, and this is a capital G and a capital S and the rest lowercase. So by inference, if she as capitals and capital letters only is deemed to be the one person, the same system would want me to assume that Grant Smith, capital G, capital S, is also still a person. So we have to get away from that, and we have to change our status in relation to the Crown and the Crown agents, and that's quite a definite process to take. Here's another example which I took, and this one is a V5 Form C for an Audi car, which at the time, I wouldn't do it today, at the time I offered to register into the Crown system as an act of good faith. And I wrote off my application with my name all written in lowercase. But when the form came back 2 weeks later, my lowercase name is now all, including the hyphen, in block capitals only, so that they understand that you are now in to the system again. If you're not careful, you're dragged in, which thing we totally do not consent and rebut. When we learn that Latin, the word for king in Latin is rex, as in Rex Harrison or Rex the dog. But the genitive, the of the king version of that is regis, R-E-G-I-S. So we need to understand here that every time we register anything, we're placing it under the king's control. And so there's another similar word, which is lex and legislation. So lex, legis, rex, regis, lex, legis. This one is the law. So anything to do with legislation is going under the statute system, which they, the Crown and their agents, want us to believe is law, when in fact it's statute. And that's in contrast to the common law, which we would regard as lawful. So we really do have to get our head around these two different things: legal, statutory, lawful, free man. I want to just put in a little bit more about this question of signatures. When we understand what the capital letters name is, and we are the living beneficiary of that name and all that it stands for, we then become the creditor for that debtor. So it helps, I think, if you understand it like a page in a bookkeeping way, that all the left-hand side of the page is about the debtor, and all the right-hand side of the page is the creditor putting money into that debtor. And so we don't sign papers anymore. Once we've realized and stepped away from this crown system, and believe me, it will be necessary to sever yourself completely from it, because you cannot continue to live with 1 foot in the crown agent camp and 1 foot in the freedom camp. That's going to be very uncomfortable. It's not to say it's always going to be easy to live in a new, free, unfettered status, but at least we know that when we're there, we're not living under deceit and trickery anymore. We're living in freedom and in truth. So once we understand debtor side, creditor side, you're looking at it from your side, you're the creditor, here's your debtor. You're the only one who's put anything into that from your birth onwards. You've contributed to the initial value, the conceived value in gold. You put all your contributions in from the age of 16, always going into there. So you are the sole living beneficiary of that account. And so anything that's done under the old system, from the moment you become aware of what this fraud is, and it's monstrous, really, you have to state clearly to the monarch and to the crown agents that thank you very much, but we want no further part in it. And we can make such a formal statement. And indeed, there is a document prepared, which is just 2 sides of A4, and we'll speak about this in more detail later. But we identify the two, and we point out very respectfully to both Crown and Crown agents, so thank you very much, but we're not part of that anymore. And therefore, we're going to stop signing anything. To sign is a sign that you're subject to the registry, subject to the king. And subject itself is a Latin word, as in trajectory, or dejected, or abject. And this ject bit, J-E-C-T, is to do with throwing, as in throwing a javelin in the Latin. So when you're subject, it means you've been thrown under the king's feet. So we don't sign anymore as subject because we stepped away from that system and made it privately and publicly known that we've done that. And so what do? We now will put autograph. We write it ourselves, and we'll write our chosen new freeman name, preferably not inside any box, which is like symbolizing a coffin, right across, diagonally across the paper, almost like a protest autograph. And instead of signing, let's finish off every document with underwritten by my hand and mark on such and such a day. And then we're finished with signing on that side, and we're autographing on this side. We've been asked, and we've mentioned already, that the crown system takes over the identity of the newborn. And over the past couple of years, together with some other co-workers, we've come to see how a very few of the extremely wealthy have for generations been manipulating the world's wealth as part of a strategy to obtain possession and total control of all of it and all of us. And what happens is that you're issued your national insurance number and your national health service number as you come out of the womb. But your father and mother are not made aware of this. And that is the element of fraud, deceit, cover-up, because they have produced this living being and are entitled to know the truth about its being here and its purpose that it's being used for. And so to that degree, this creation of the persona is fraudulent. And so there is a way to find not only the fact that the NHS number is used, but to find that behind your national insurance number, there is a hidden account stored, which we're not really supposed to know about. And we have written over the years to the Treasury on more than one occasion and asked them to clarify, now that we've become aware where these accounts are kept and under what sort code they are issued and run as bank accounts. So in that sense, we've had some help from people who are well connected to find out exactly how to compose this hidden account number. And it is possible, and we can give you all the papers for these things, to go online and to search under the given one sort code, which runs all the government's operations on those accounts as national insurance accounts, which His Majesty's Revenue and Customs called the tax direct account, but which is linked inseparably to the birth of the infant. And so we can find out how to do that by going to certain websites. We can manipulate the date on which the birth of anyone was registered. And it's important that we do look at the date of registration or registration of the birth rather than the birth date itself, because not everyone gets their registration details the same fortnight or even the same year. You might get a situation where a child born at the very end of December, the birth isn't registered with the Crown until January. And so, of course, the year would be one number different, therefore the account number would be inaccurate. But by adding on the 15 years and 9 months, which seems to be the system, we're able to get to the first 2 missing digits, which go in front of the 6 digits of the national insurance number, and which then give us a complete 8-digit account number. And when we've got that, we can go on to yet another website, and we can enter the sort code, and we can enter the now discovered full 8-digit account number, and indeed you can print off a confirmation that yes, this is correct, this is the account number, and it'll tell you what's possible under that account. It will even give you an IBAN number, and there again, there's a little bit of a trick in the middle of that, but we can get to know and prove these things. And if we're doubtful that this system works, why not put in now the sort code of your regular, everyday bank account number, your sort code and your regular bank account number, and you can print that down and it will tell you, yes, you're with Santander, you're with Barclays, you're with so-and-so, and it will tell you what's possible within that account. So we know that this thing's running correctly, and we know how to find out accurately our account numbers. And we can give that to people who are interested in full detail on paper. So what we're saying here is that at the point that the child, the newborn, is given its legal fiction name, it is effectively no different from a company or a corporation. It becomes an entity. And the Latin word is ens legis, which means a legal thing. Even the word identity is an id entity. And in Latin, it's is, er, id, he, she, it. So the entity is an it, therefore it's identified. It's all in the Latin. But you become at that point, as a squawking toddler, not even a toddler, a squawking infant, you become at that point a corporation. And this, friends, is the very one slim link upon which all governments are able to income tax and council tax and goodness knows what else tax onto your person, your persona. The fact that they've made you into a false persona, block capital letters, identity. And we've touched on the fact that that value is traded for 16 years or so on the stock market internationally as an asset, all of which is contributing to the, think about the word, common wealth, the Commonwealth. There's a whole section that we could be talking about to differentiate between what is cash and what is credit. For instance, when you take out a bank loan or when you take out a mortgage, nothing is ever actually put into your account in terms of money or any other valuable, permanent, identifiable thing. All that's happened is that your credit has been extended within that account. But the tragedy is that we haven't been told about this. And then they go along to charge us interest, even compound interest, on money which they've never loaned us. And that too is fraud. And if you want to have a look at this in some more detail, there are two excellent pieces that you can look up online, and we've seen them recently on YouTube. It's a two-part thing, but the second part in particular was relevant for me was a chap called Leonard Ulrich, U-L-R-I-C-H, Leonard Ulrich. And he has a video there dealing with the illusion of money and what it is and what it isn't. And also there's this chap who's quite straight-laced, very smart, Robert Werner, who also speaks on the fact of how this money could be used better. So those are not things that I'd go into detail here, but you can look them up afterwards. Now that we've become aware that our conceived value is being traded internationally, it all seems a bit intangible until you realize that you can go and make searches within the system where these are controlled, and you can get forms downloaded to confirm that you have indeed got an account, that you have indeed got a bond, and that you are non-belligerent, and so on, all expressed in capital letters, of course, but it's definitely showing that you are being traded on, and you have this value. And you can get a form, which is a file and report that comes out, and we know where to send you for that. And that information is available privately. So this is a place at which credit is held under the strawman name, whatever you've been given, for all the time that you are alive, and indeed for much longer. We've touched on the fact that a national insurance number is given to the infant at birth, and that is used as the bond. And for the first 16 years, the teenager will perhaps know nothing about it. Not in every case, but in most cases. I have a granddaughter who's 14 now, and a grandson who's 11, and I've known what their national insurance numbers are for several years. Because there can be circumstances in the family where you need some financial assistance from the existing Crown system, and they will send you application forms which will carry a reference number at the top, but halfway down the form the applicant, on behalf of the child, is invited to paste in the reference from the top of the paper into this box, which is marked National Insurance Number. So we now know that those numbers are already allocated well before the child is even able to walk or talk. And we've then begun to poke the bear a little bit here and write to HMRC to try and find out more about what's actually going on behind. And what you find is that they don't seem to be able to lie about it, but they sure as anything can't afford to tell the truth. So we get little half-truths. And you might think that when they read this sort code, that would set a little alarm bell ringing in their mind, and you give them the accurate account number. And the denial will come back on paper saying, Treasury has never held an account under such a sort code. Treasury has never held such a sort code or account number. Well, of course, this is quite true, but only half true, because they are held and handled overseas. And if anyone's interested to know, it's quite simple to go and check that and to get your own file and report on your account. And we have the link for those people who want it. We've written also to Newcastle. I've got a pal who works in investment in London, and for this conversation we'll call his name Brian. And he's been in investment for 30 years, and he's very much on our page. So he was advising us not to bother writing to the normal offices, but to write to this office in Newcastle to get further information about these accounts. And so we started doing this, sending information requests, and back would come more information, almost as though they were giving us more information than we were asking for, kind of putting their foot in it. And so we were able to send more papers, and so more papers again. And so in the end, we must have sent a question which was perhaps too sensitive, and we got a reply, and it was on the header note paper from the people up in Newcastle, but there was a sticker on the back of the envelope when it arrived to say it had come from HMRC Solicitors Department in London East 20. So clearly the people in Newcastle had run out of ideas what to say. And the great thing about that was that it went through the history of the way these numbers have been handled, but not ever in this reply admitting that there were any accounts, always talking only about the sort code. And we found out that 9 years ago, without talking to anyone in the House of Commons, the government at the time, under the leadership of David Cameron, took the contract which handled this sort code, which had previously belonged to the Citibank, an American outfit, also with offices in Canary Wharf, and had transferred this sort code to something which no one had ever quite heard of, called Government Banking Services. And it looks as though in about 2008, perhaps Gordon Brown's time, that the government had decided to make itself into a bank and call itself GBS, Government Banking Services. And all this sort code has been with this GBS ever since, at least definitely since 2015, on their own admission. But here's the thing. It says that this sort code is ring-fenced for government use only. So we began to think about that, and we wrote and asked more questions, because what's happened at that point is that you, with your national insurance number and your account there, created on your life for your benefit, seems to have been taken away from you and switched round. And the benefits of that have now passed into Crown control, and we are left with the trusteeship by inference. And here's the thing, ring-fenced for government use only. And so we asked them to explain what statute, what legislation, what bill, what legal wrinkle this could possibly have happened. Bearing in mind that the Trustee Act of 1925 tells us that the beneficiary cannot also ever be the trustee. And there's definitely a switch has taken place at that point. And we've asked this question 3 times, and we're still waiting for an answer over 18 months later. So I don't think we're holding our breath on that one. Once we had this sort code identified and where to look to prove the account number, someone had a brainwave to look at the question of council tax, which is a very deeply contested area in this country at the moment. And we found that if we take the reference number on our council tax bill, for those of us who are still paying via direct debit from their bank account to the local council, if we take that account number and copy and paste it against the Crown's unique sort code, we find that, yes, indeed, there is also an account there. So we understand that that is where the council tax contributions are being taken a second time. They've been taken from your account twice, once from your regular bank account and once from your trust account. So here's another one to think about while you're doing this. We took issue with the local Yorkshire Water Authority because there we were being chased for a few arrears, a quarterly arrears, a bit behind, and we began to ask questions about them. And when we took issue with them, they sent us their sort code and their regular account number, and we put that account number up against the Crown unique sort code, we found the Water Authority is also working with the Crown to make sure that whatever we pay for our water gets taken a second time into the Crown consolidated funds. Now, I'm sure you can understand there that once that money is taken a second time, you may think that your first contribution is helping to have your bins sorted or whatever needs doing in your local schools. You may feel that you're paying for your water at the local level, but the money which is taken a second time is totally beyond our control. And so how can we be sure, sitting here, that our funds are not contributing to some war being run overseas which we've no control over, and which, if we were given a choice, we might jolly well say, no, thank you, you're not putting my money there. And we can give you references to people who have made an official protest to the Crown government about this. And we can give you declarations and reasons that they've withheld their contributions, much as we withhold our council tax contributions until we let them explain exactly what's going on there. When we become aware of the fraud that's been carried out against us, it would have been so much simpler to have told the truth from the beginning. Why shouldn't the parents know that their child could be valued so highly? And come to that, when we hear last year that the present head of state is said to be worth 9 trillion sterling, 9,000 billion, what would be the problem with, to put it in the vernacular, cutting the infant in for 10% of that from the beginning? Because you see, if we were to do that, just take it forward, you wouldn't need a national health service. And you would understand that if you don't work, you can't eat. But equally, you can support yourself. And if parents were working wisely with the children, they could get them off to a really good start in life. But that's never divulged to either the father, the mother, or the child. So when we step out of that system, people will say to me, how do I become sovereign then? It's all very well you sit there talking about sovereignty, but how do I become sovereign? And I like what someone said in a thing last year. You've got to understand that this sovereignty is not a thing to be shouted about. It's just a state of truth. And you have to ditch the fear, and you have to own the room and be in control of these conversations when they arrive, because you know that in the end, whatever the Crown agents are going to scream at you, they are defending a fraudulent position, and we are the guys with the clean hands. So in the end, we are the straight ones, and there's none above us in the sense of souverain There's nobody above us because we are living in a straight, clean level of life, and they are these people with the black hats. And so we're not a legal fiction entity at all. We are very much alive and kicking. And this, of course, I'm sure many people have heard of it, all dates back to the time of the 17th century when England was beset about by the Great Plague and by the Fire of London, which led to the government of the day and the Crown of the day calling up what's called the Sesquivie Trust, which is the old French for who's living. So many thousands, hundreds of thousands had died in these two afflictions, that who was left alive. And so Sesquivie is ceux qui vivent, those who live in the old French, and that is the basis on which your account was run. And so you're not a legal fiction entity, you're writing and you send forward a form to explain that, thank you very much, we've understood what's happening now and we want no further part of it. And you write that, there's an affidavit that can go behind it, that we can also guide you on how to fill that out. But we can show that we're not belligerent, we're not anti-government, but we are very much pro-truth. So, in the light of everything that we've mentioned this morning, and obviously there's a great deal hidden behind these short comments on the video, essentially it's a call to action, it's a call to decision, which each one of us has got to face and decide where do we stand. Some people call it changing your status, which is a bit too Latinized for me. Changing your standing. And the first thing to say about that is that you overstand, not understand, the Crown system, because we stand over it. And we make it a point, once we've taken this step, that we live above their rules, so that as far as they're concerned, our lives are beyond reproach, but nevertheless, we're not going to be sucked back into their corrupt system. And so you could say that this is a call to action, a call to decision. And you might think, well, what can we do about it? So what we're going to go through now, briefly, are just some pointers in the right direction. We have to decide in our own minds, in our own spirit, that we're doing this thing. And it is somewhere where you can't sit on the fence. You'll find it very uncomfortable living with one leg in the Crown camp, as I've said, and another in the Freedom camp. But at the same time, they cannot deny that what they've done is wrong, but neither can they bring themselves ever to admit that what we're saying is true. And so you'll get all this half-truths and these quaint little sentences. We've not ever held such a thing, but of course it's held somewhere else, that kind of thing. So I'm going to read out a little bit here, which came out of, I was sitting in a meeting one day in the old Scotland Yard while I was still in the police service. And two American detectives turned up in the office, and they were here to collect some prisoner or other. And so we all got to talking, and I was quite amused to find that this female sergeant, she was Detective Sergeant Crazy Horse, which of course is not a very common name. But in the course of doing it, I said something in German, and she translated it, which was also interesting. And we were talking about covering up the sins in a way. You're saying, well, you know, be sure your sin will find you out, or it's evident, crimes become evident because of what people do. And so I quoted the scripture which comes in Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, chapter 28 and verse 20, and it says that the bed is too short and the blanket is too narrow to cover the sins of the nation. They're becoming visible at the sides. And she immediately turned that into the German. Das Bett ist zu kurz und die Decke zu schmal. So that produced a conversation. And this paper now is really as a result of that, what happened that day. When we get to this point and we want to put the Crown and the Crown agents on notice of where we stand, and we serve that notice in writing to both Monarch and the Crown agents, declaring that we are neither a company nor a corporation, but that we are a living man or woman At that point, our standing becomes protected because we've stepped out of falsehood into truth. We've then rebutted their presumption of statute, which wants to treat us all as being dead at sea. And we've established this fact by a short affidavit. It used to be a very long document, but now it's been made much shorter and manageable. A form of declaration which protects us, both our living entity and our sovereign rights as holder of the life we live. So you might want to say, but how do we establish these facts of nature to those who neither don't grasp the truth or won't accept it as truth? And we do this by refuting their false presumptions. Presumptions that pretend that we're a persona, a Latin word for a thing, a person. And you can check all of these terms in Black's Law Dictionary, and they all come under the general heading of glossa or legalese. We pointed out both to doubters and to the deniers all those crown-sanctioned statutes and legislation which they hold so precious. And so there are 9 in particular which Crown agents have agreed on international agreements which we've underwritten as a nation and yet which we regularly break every day. I'm not going to go through the 9 here, but we do have them all itemized if people want to look at them. So what we're doing is we've stated our true belief here. We as free men and women have nothing more to prove or to defend. It is down to the corrupt Crown agents and their system to evidence that what they're presuming is factually correct. And they can't because it isn't. We stand our ground and we remind them what their statutes are calling them to do and to live by, which they and their predecessors created these things, and now they try to force them on us in our ignorance, and we have come to spot what's going on, so we're stepping out of that. And so we've got to protect our clean hands position and expose their lack of honesty. So that's really what the first thing we can do. And in respect of this now, we're going to look at 1 or 2 further points. We've got a paper which shows you how to find the complete 8-digit account number which hides behind your national insurance number. So we'll show you how to find that. There's a calculation program. It's very simple. And step by step, the paper will take you through that if you want to get it. And the paper is called How to Find Your Funds. So those who want that can have it. We write a notice, as we said, to the powers that be. And this used to be quite a long thing, but it's now simply 2 sides of A4. And we can't make it any more comprehensive, concise at the same time. And we're giving notice. We don't write letters anymore once we've stepped out of the system. We send notices, we don't sign, we underwrite. You've really got to get clear in our minds the difference between legal and lawful. So on there we're going to say that we are the lawful holder of this document which we're sending to the Crown and to probably 7 other main government departments, all of which are well identified: Home Secretary, Prime Minister, Attorney General, Lord Chief Justice, etc., etc., that we are living men and women, flesh and blood, heart and soul. So that security agreement is there. We're complete. We have an affidavit which can go behind these things, which if necessary we can send and confirm what we're saying. The truth is that it's very likely they will ignore it altogether, but that doesn't make it untrue. But if they fail to deny what we've said as true, then in fact they are tacitly accepted. And this is a situation that we're in. So the security agreement is now declared, which confirms that we are the only one who has ever put value as creditor into that debtor name. But then there's also this letter which you should look at called the paramount claim of the life and estate of your name. And I'm going to read some of this through because it's pointing out that from the beginning, from the conception in the womb, the infant is alive by definition, which ought to trouble all of those of us who want abortion, late abortions possible. and that from the moment of birth, we are a living, clear, sovereign individual, and we're not deserving to be sucked back into any sort of taxation system without the father and mother being informed and consenting, which doesn't happen. So that is called a paramount claim for your life and status. And another thing that you can do as a practical issue is to take your name off the voters' register, because whenever you're on the voters' register, you are essentially still a government employee. And I'm going to give you a personal note about this here. It must be 18 months, almost 2 years ago now, that I saw this point and I thought, well, I'll do it. And you have to do this at your county level, wherever you live. So for us, it was to write to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and again, send a notice instructing them to take your name off the voters' register. Register again, you see, register. Take your name off the voters' register, and to confirm when this has been done. And this letter was sent in, I think, in the February of 2023, and not a squeak ever came back. No one acknowledged anything. And then we had recently a national election on the 4th of July, and I hit on the idea on the 2nd of July, which was a Tuesday. I walked into the local town hall and asked to see a copy of the voters' register. "You can't take photographs," came back the statement. I said, "I don't want to take photographs, I just want to look at the register." And so I looked in to my street, and lo and behold, my name was gone. So it had been taken off, but I'd never been informed about it. On the Thursday morning, the 4th of July, I went into the local polling station and I identified who I am by showing my taxable name on my on my bus pass for identity. And the question came, "What road is it?" Gave her the name of the road. "What number?" Gave her the number. "That's funny," said the lady. "Can't see it." So I looked her straight in the face and I said, "Thank you very much, madam. You've told me exactly what I needed to know. Have a wonderful day," and walked out. So we've been able to prove twice that they will do these things if they're told to do them, but they haven't got the honesty, even by the so-called Nolan principles. They should be quite open about their business. They haven't got the honesty to tell us that they've done it. So that's the thing that should happen. Coming off the voters' register, understanding what your paramount claim of life and estate is, and with that, you're well on the way to becoming an independent, non-government employee. And just to finish off with that, we've got a situation, I'm going to add this on at the end, where continually people are fretting. We're talking to people who certainly want to be where we're standing, but are worried in case the bailiffs might call and so on. So many people have talked about this that we put together a general notice. And I'm going to read this to you because a copy of this will be handy to hang outside your door. So inside your door, so that when they knock on the door, you can give them a copy. And this is available if people want a Royal Mail Special Delivery Service to the headquarters of any of these bailiffs or enforcement agents. It can be done so. "We, the people, as free men and women, are nowadays being harassed by Crown agents, operating either under colour of admin court approval or as subcontracted corporate employees to make us think that we're all persons of interest to His Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, with specific regard to allegations that we're all withholding or refusing to submit to Crown taxation. Firstly, let's make it be clear that we do not make any joinder on any issue by electronic communications, not by email, nor by texting, nor by phone. We have no confidence in such being secure and reliable, least of all where the pretext for its use is demonstrably questionable, unlawful, often illegal. We had a situation recently where an email popped up in our inbox, and it's about the World Company Register, an opportunity now to get your company recognized worldwide. And you could fill in this box, and you could send it to this address in Netherlands, and they would help you on with your business. And we found out, to our consternation, that when you tick the box, what you've done, you've made a 3-year agreement, contract with this company for something like €900 per annum. And the worst thing was that they're not in Netherlands at all, but they're in Nevis in the West Indies. So for that kind of reason, just don't contemplate it. And secondly, important point is we've got correspondence now on file, on headed crown paper, from His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the Solicitors Department, at 14 Westfield Avenue, Stratford, that's in London East 20, admitting on their paper that the many millions of payments for council tax and other taxes sent by us in good faith from our regular bank accounts are in fact duplicated. And that's a very concerning situation. So we have covered, I think, all the general points here. And all we can say is that you have to learn to think, drop the fear, stand in your own security, in your sovereign position, and you can't expect to get us through a ride. But in the end, we know we're on the right track and we got prepared to commit to it. So thanks again for listening. I'm just going to say at the end that we do have a summary of papers that can help, which will be available. And we also have a recommended reading list, which will show some of the background information that we've gone through to come to the point where we are. Thank you.